Good evening to everyone. I'm Daphne Grigoriadis, economic analyst. Welcome to the online discussion organized by the Foundation Konrad Adenauer, Greece and Cyprus, with topic COP26 conference. How do we move forward in Europe? The Adenauer Foundation promotes political and scientific thinking, and I'm glad to have again the opportunity to coordinate a panel on a burning issue. But first, I would like to invite the Honorable Director of Konrad Adenauer, Greece and Cyprus office, Mr. Henri Bonnet, of course, to give us a short greeting. Mr. Bonnet, good evening.
Thank you, Daphne. Kalispera, good evening and welcome to our seminar today. I'm very happy that one of the last events we have before Christmas is about this very important topic. The Glasgow meeting has just been ended 1 month ago, and I think many observers have already seen that it has been disappointing, the results which came. If we realize that we had already 26 conferences in a row every year, the question is how much progress we have made. In that respect, of course, we have to ask ourselves, is this yearly get-together only hot air? Especially if we think about how many airplane emissions are needed to bring all those thousands of delegates to Glasgow or to any other place. And even in Germany, where we had the recent elections, the re-election results showed that not everybody, not even the young people, all are convinced that green topics, climate change are the most important topics. Among the young people, maybe you know, most of the voters or the majority of the voters was for the Liberals, not for the Greens. So how do we move forward? It's an important question for us in Germany, in Greece, and in the whole of Europe. I'm very happy and interested to have the very interesting 4 experts speaking today. I want to say thank you to Professor Kudnuri, Konstantinos Macheras, Mr. Lechtenfeld, and Mrs. Drees for joining us today. We're very much looking forward to your opinion. We at Konrad Adenauer Stiftung want to promote dialogue between different opinions and also different countries. That's why we're here today, and identify possible solutions to the challenges we face together. Let's see how far we get in that today. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you all once again, and I give the floor back to Daphne.
Thank you, Mr. Bonnet. So, COP26 is over. Its government presented what was politically and economically acceptable to them. Making the evaluation of the conference, we realized that no one can go back in efforts so that the rise temperature does not exceed 1.5 degrees centigrade. Some of the key outcomes of COP26 are commitment of developed countries to increase funding for the climate, a commitment to reduce methane emissions by 30% by 2030. But this commitment has not been signed, at least for the time being, by 3 heavily industrialized countries, China, India, and Russia. Also, 100 heads of state signed a joint statement committing that will stop deforestation by 2030. High goals have been set, and the question is, to what extent are they achievable? The EU adapts its policy according to the environmental, social, and governance criteria. It is trying to increase its competitiveness based on green growth. The agreement on a set of sustainable development goals was a major achievement, but was not accompanied by a comprehensive plan for how to achieve them. This will be negotiated. Economic policies for the implementation of sustainable development must address the causes and not the symptoms of the problem. We need to reassess the problems in the context of sustainable development instead of just describing them as environmental, social, or economic. That's why we have with us today experts on these issues. So we have today Professor Fifi Koundouri, Athens University of Economics and Business, President-elect of the European Association of Environmental and Resource Economists, Fellow World Academy of Arts and Science, co-chair SDSN Europe and SDSN Greece. Also, Konstantinos Macheras, EU Climate Pact Coordinator for Greece, board member of organization Earth. Tobias Lechtenfeld, company builder 1.5 Degrees Ventures. And Sabine Drees, senior advisor of International Affairs Association of German Cities. So let's elaborate on the general question. Which are the key outtakes, according to your opinion, from COP26? What are we to expect from our countries until 2030 realistically? Let's start with Professor Phoebe Koudouri. Ms. Koudouri, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, I've been participating in COPs since 2020. This has been the best, more optimistic, let's say, COP of my life. And I will quickly say why. But first of all, let me enumerate what we have achieved before start criticizing in terms of what we have not achieved, what we could have achieved, and all that. We have achieved that 40 countries around the world committed to 2050 climate neutrality. China, 2060, India, 2070, US and China committing to continuing climate negotiations, 450 business and financial institutions that create a coalition worth of 130 trillion have voted to put climate at the heart of their finance. We have a commitment to develop global standards body that takes aim at the company greenwashing claims. We have 110 countries making new pledges to cut methane. Of course, we have some loud exclusions that did not sign, as you said. We have 133 countries, including Brazil with Amazon forest and Russia, committing to saving the forest, stop deforestation by 2030 and conserving the forest. This is crucial because forests are a big sink for CO2. We have ensured the carbon market integrity, and we have a recommitment. Once again, the developed world confirming commitment of 100 billion a year for climate adaptation in developing countries. So this is a lot. And it's a lot, especially if you look at the map of commitments and pledges 2 years ago. It is not good that China does not have 2050 commitment and India does not have 2050 commitment, but at least now they have a commitment. They didn't have one 2 years ago. In total, if, and I say if because we don't know, if we have full implementation of all the announced targets, including net zero targets, long-term commitments to reducing CO2 and other greenhouse emissions, and nationally determined contributions as per the COP, if we add all this, and we have made the calculation, then we will reach an increase in global temperature of plus 1.8, with the possibility of a standard deviation that could bring us down to 1.5. So in terms of commitments and pledges, we are not very far away from where we want to be. And this time I am optimistic, not because the pledges are quite bigger than any other time before, but because I've seen for the first time real engagement of financial institutions and businesses. And the real engagement does not only derive by the fact that climate effects are here, we feel them. We have droughts, we have a very big temperatures, heat waves, we have floods, we have forest fires. And we know nowadays, the general public knows, the politicians know, the policymakers know that these are connected with climate change. We have one other big breakthrough. Technological development, technology advancements have made it possible for renewable energy and circular economy and nature-based solutions, which are the major drivers to climate neutrality, to be cost-effective, to be competitive in terms of their cost to fossil fuels. And because of that, the businesses and the financial institutions see huge market opportunities there. So it's not just because there is a big pressure of politicians to commit to their pledges, it is also because the technological advancements has made the solutions for the transition to climate neutrality cost effective. We can now be better off by employing renewables rather than fossil fuels. Of course, there is a huge difference from committing to something to actually implementing the pathway to achieving it at some future day. And that pathway needs explicit and detailed per country development of technological pathways, the right mixture of technologies to be used to take us to climate neutrality by 2050, the right political package. Of course, we know that we have many policies that are going to help us already in place. We have the SDGs, we have the European Green Deal, we have the Recovery and Resilience Fund, we have the climate law, we have the EU taxonomy and the corporate sustainability directive. We have the Fit for 55, a package of 13 legislation proposals that is revising all that has to do with our energy, our land use system, our mobility system towards achieving 55% reduction of CO2 emissions and other greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. So what is important now is to use the existing political framework, the existing technological advancements, and develop the right financial instruments and regulations and laws in order to detail the pathway of the transition. And I will leave it there.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Koudouri. You were clear in your position. And now we will move on to Mr. Konstantinos Macheras. Good evening, Mr. Macheras. The floor is yours.
Good evening to all. Very happy to be here. It's an excellent opportunity that I can see friends and colleagues. Hopefully, we can soon try to do it up close and personal. We have missed this. And after the beloved Phoebe and her introduction and her experience, let me try to follow up with my take on this COP, and especially how I lived it this year in Glasgow, and if I can add to everything that Phoebe add also the perspective of civil society in another capacity. What I'm trying to say is that my first COP was COP21 in Paris in 2015, and in all honesty, it was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. Finally, after 21 COPs, and how many years before that, almost 25 years after Rio, we had an agreement, finally. A goal that actually goes even below 2 degrees, and there's understanding that globally we're going to find solutions. I left Paris then in 2015 with euphoria, and it actually fueled my energy, a lot of my partners and colleagues and other organizations, not just an organization where I work, that we can do it. And now there is a plan. Don't forget, and Phoebe mentioned this, that 3 months earlier in September, we also had the first ecumenical global pathway on how we can achieve all this. which means the SDGs and the Agenda 2030, that for the first time, everybody agreed that this is about bringing everything together, that it's not just about trying to tackle climate change, it's also about eliminating inequalities, eradicating poverty, and at the end of the day, it's about how we move forward as humanity. So, going into COP26 in Glasgow, what was my feeling? Actually, it was one of disappointment and even fear, because 5 years after COP21, what do we have? The scientists saying, even screaming out loud, that listen, even with the so far commitments, we're going at even up to 3 degrees, 2.73 degrees. Phoebe can let us know more about the numbers. And what does it mean for people? It means that extreme weather events like the heat wave this year in the south of Europe, or the floods in the north of Europe like Germany, or the fires in Greece, are going to be augmented by some scientists up to 80% in probability of happening. This is not just deteriorating for our ecosystems and biodiversity, it's a stage of apocalyptic devastation for humanity. So what else also made me apprehensive before Glasgow? That the fact that there is an agreement there is an agreement that the adaptation fund since 2009 is going to be paying 100 billion per year for the most vulnerable groups and countries to advance. They actually still haven't received anything. So a lot of things like this, and of course, Phoebe and Tobias mentioned it, the Russians were incoming. We don't know what's happening with China. So the truth is that I went to Glasgow. I did have the opportunity to participate in some of the meetings and the negotiations, but also to meet a lot of people. And coming out of Glasgow, I agree with Phoebe that I come out optimistic. I think that at the end of the day, it's not only the list of agreements which one by one and all together that Phoebe mentioned are quite important, but there are also some other things that I was trying to make notes as I was hearing you. So one of the things that is important, besides the ones that we already heard, is that for the first time, the public engagement was probably the highest ever. I personally, and I would like to share your opinions as well, I never remember any time before that the COP was a public discussion, was every night on every news outlet around the world, that people that are not part of this field knew about the COP happening in Glasgow, okay? And that I think that this is one of the most important elements. We already mentioned that the COP is a very good opportunity for people to come together. It used to be politicians, diplomats, scientists. It has broadened. The business sector is well represented, although I just came from a meeting from the UN Global Compact that they still fear how much of their involvement is greenwashing. However, they're there and they're making commitments. At the same time, we have the politicians, not just the diplomats anymore, being pushed by the constituency that this is an existential matter, that is not just about politics or how, as governments, we're going to be prevailing. In order for me to be a bit more focused in these first comments I'm making, something that I also think that I saw as a difference between my first COP in Paris and in Glasgow, it seemed to me, and some of you can elaborate on that as well, that that climate justice, the fact that we're not talking about just a green transition, but we're talking about also an inclusive and fair transition, is nowadays a de facto part of the discussion and the negotiation. That is something that I'm not sure that was so evident before. Not that we have reached where we need to. Climate finance was also already mentioned. We still haven't not realized where the funds are going to come from. So at the end of the day, I'm saying that I come out of COP26 an optimist. I come out of COP26 with hope. The hope, it's still probably, a small crack on the door, And I like the fact that what we come out even in the official documents is that 1.5 is still alive if we now actually get our act together and we finally do it. So this is just for the opening. Hope that we can have more time to discuss later. Thank you for inviting me tonight. I'm very happy to be here with you.
Many thanks to Mr. Macheras. We will move on to Mr. Tobias Lechtenfeld. Good evening, Mr. Lechtenfeld.
Hi, and good evening. Thank you for the invitation, and a real pleasure to joining this very distinct group here of specialists and experts. I think my overall conclusion of the COP this year is also more positive than negative for a number of reasons. But I think the most important is I think it's the first time that actually we've seen not just setting of targets in the debate on what is the right target, but that we've actually started to see an initiation of the debate and how to technically get there. I think a lot of the debates that we've seen in the past were so much on getting everyone on board, getting everyone convinced, getting everyone aligned. And now it's actually time for action. And I think everyone is starting to realize, or most people are starting to realize, the daunting challenge of really doing the industrial transformation, of rebuilding our economies, of rebuilding every factory, every machinery, every building heating, everything we use every day needs to be redone to be climate neutral by 2050. And that's just very, very daunting. And I think what this COP has done, beyond the big announcements on methane, for example, which are excellent, is that it has really started to shift the debate in that. And I'm positive or hopeful, at least, that in the coming COPs, we will see much more on not what we want to achieve, but how we will actually get there, because the time is running. And this is, I think, what's needed. So how do we use incentives and not just subsidies to get industries to transform? How do we build these markets where you have a green premium priced in already, so that industries are willing to convert now their old fossil technologies to green renewable technologies? How do we can help innovators to scale their new technologies faster into the market to reach not just 1 or 2 plants per year, but 20, 30, 40 utilities per year? I think these are the debates that will keep us busy in the coming years. And I think the faster we shift into that realm, I think the better chances we have, because I think there's a bit of sometimes what I observe, certainly at the Brussels level, but also at Berlin, is in the political world, there's this debate about political targets, and then somehow miraculously it is assumed that this is enough to get all the economy shifting to green, but clearly that's not the case. The economy is an extremely complex undertaking, and it cannot be managed like a planned economy. So we need to really think through the transition. I think even if we agree broadly on where we want to be in 2050 or even 2030, what is the dynamic roadmap to get there, and what is the most cost-effective roadmap? I'm an economist by training. I spent many years with the World Bank, and I think this whole thinking on how do you help industry scaling, how do you manage an industry to scale in the most cost-effective way for the taxpayer, which is critical here because we're just totally short on funds to pay for all of this, and how do you make it in a way that it doesn't just increase prices for the end user, which would just trickle down to inflation, which would also be horrific. And I think both of these questions, I think we need very smart economists in the future to join the COP debates, because I think we're moving from a climate science political debate into much more an economic industrial transition debate. And this is also really what I'm looking forward for, to perhaps tonight to touch upon, share some views. And in my view, that's something that I'm starting to see in the COP. Some of the debates there, some of the side talks there, some of the panels there, and also some of the participants. You see more and more of the financial sector participated, not just to protect their assets, but to really come with new financing strategies. And that's a really good sign that, without to mention any names, but big investment hubs and investment banks are starting to look at climate not just as a short-term investment opportunity, but as a real game changer in how we run our economies. And that's really good to see. And hopefully politics will keep the pace, and this is of course equally important and must be done, and it's good that that's how the targets were set. And of course, we hope that the laggers will still sign on to some of the biggest agreements. I think there again we can work by example, and if we can show that we can reduce our methane emissions in some of our leading industries, then I would hope that also some of the countries that still haven't signed on will do so, because they see that technically it's possible, financially it's possible. Just use it as a concrete example. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lechtenfeld. We will now turn to Mrs. Sabine Dress. Good evening, Mrs. Dress.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me to this interesting panel. And I'm really happy to listen to you, and also hearing some more or less optimistic statements, and special thanks to Ms. Kunduri. So because I find it really important not to sum up all and everything as blah blah and what we learned from our media and Fridays for Future. So I think we should really much more appreciate what we have already achieved. Not because of being happy with all and everything, but we need to encourage the people. So, and for that, I find it important to highlight achievements. This encourages the citizens much more than all these blamings and complaints. And yes, it was also not my first COP. So my first one was the one in Bonn some years ago, the one after Paris, and now maybe I can also come to some critical points. What was really good in Bonn was, from our perspective of cities, that cities were an integral part of the whole COP23 it was. So, and that is what we really miss. So this time in Glasgow, I was not able to attend the COP26 in person. I was connected virtually, moderating a session with some guests which were in Glasgow, from Texas, South Korea, and city of Mannheim, because all cities all over the world have not received more badges than 22. So it was not my part to get one. And but this is not the main problem from our point of view. It's somehow German, but we hear that from all cities of the world, they don't feel really acknowledged. And you know that the transformation to achieve climate goals needs to be done on local level. And local level should not be seen just as implementers. So cities want to be an integral part and systematically involved, and also sit at negotiation tables and discuss how we really can organize the transformation. And this is one point. So we find that the Paris Agreement and the European Green Deal is a very good framework, but we need to find a systematic approach how to involve cities being part of the whole business. And all states report about national determined contributions. It's not in Germany possible to highlight and to make visible locally determined contribution. And the problem starts that our cities are not able to join an official delegation. So each and everyone can be member of the German climate delegation. But it was, in Germany, there's just a seat for one representative of cities, and that's not me, that's the mayor of Berlin or Hamburg or Mannheim. So this is our criticism. And I think here we should think together how to find a new way to involve cities. And I end also, as some of you, with an optimistic view to COP27 in Egypt next year.
Thank you, Mrs. Dress. Thank you all for your interesting statements. At this point, we will move on the questions section. So I would like to start with Mrs. Koudouri. Mrs. Koudouri, you have mentioned on different occasions that we need to find a new way of financing the market in order for it to be fully focused on sustainability and provide space for innovation. Which should be these reforms who would need to apply in Greece and then respectively in the EU in order to achieve this?
Yes, thank you very much, and indeed very interesting positions from the other panelists, and very complementary, the different positions that came through. It's really nice discussion, at least for me. So with regards to financing, governments are asked to do something very different from what they have been doing since the 80s. Since the 80s, they were asked just to make sure that they intervene in the market only when there was a big market failure. Now governments are asked to take a significant long-term role in investments and play an entrepreneurial role to provide patient, long-term strategic finance that will support sustainable innovation. In order to do this, you need to reconceptualize financial stability and reconceptualize the financial sector as a whole. At the macro level, you need the missions of central banks to include climate and environment degradation risk. You need, for example, the European Investment Bank and the European Investment Fund that have the relevant expertise to scale towards the direction of deploying equity-type financial instruments, which will be complementary to loans and guarantees. At the meso level, you need the national public investment organizations to provide positive sources of long-term patient finance, which will support sustainable investing. So in order to invest in a sustainable project, in a project that supports climate mitigation, adaptation, sustainable use of water and marine resources, circular economy, biodiversity protection, not only you want finance for integrating the innovation aspect of these projects, but you also need this finance to be long-term, because the benefits of these projects are not short-term benefits, are benefits that are being diffused throughout the time horizon. At the micro level, you need the companies to understand that those that switch first towards sustainable practices will be the most competitive, the most innovative, and the most successful over time. So you need a restructuring of the financial and the market system, both at the macro, meso, and micro level. And more precisely, you need to understand that the global infrastructural investment gap is estimated at 30 trillion worldwide, and this is for the period 2035 to 2040. So public resources will not be sufficient to meet such investment needs. So it is important to think how you are going to bring the private money into this sustainability transition. We know that 3/4 of total money around the world are private money. So you really need to think about public-private partnerships. You need to think about blended finance. Global experience has shown that 36.3% of private finance is mobilized through blended finance. Basically, this uses public funds to share risk and crowd in private investment through co-financing. And this has usually taken the form of relatively safe senior debt directed towards mature technologies, such as on-grid renewable energy. Moreover, new financing instruments such as guarantees and equity have higher leveraging ratios and better meet the needs of private investors to finance emergence, deployment, and widespread adoption of new climate solutions. So we need this blended finance, and at the same time, we need the financing instruments to strengthen the role of domestic capital markets and institutions, and we need methodologies to factor climate risk and opportunities into financial decision making. And it is important with this major global momentum for green and net zero transition to use the experience of European countries in pioneering these innovative financial solutions, which are explicitly documented in the EU taxonomy and in the new new proposal for a corporate sustainability directive. I want to remind you that now in EU, this EU taxonomy makes explicit which investments can be considered and can be financed as sustainable investments. These are climate change mitigation, adaptation, sustainable use and protection of water and marine resources, circular economy, pollution prevention, and biodiversity. And not only we have this classification that will improve the flow of money towards sustainable activities, we also have the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which extends the scope to all large companies and all companies listed on regulated markets. All these companies have a commitment to submit a sustainability report, and this directive also requires auditing, monitoring, detailed reporting, and digital tagging of the information that you include in the sustainability report. So it makes it much more difficult to greenwash. And finally, within this EU taxonomy, we have 6 amending delegated acts on fiduciary duties, investments, and insurance advice. This is to ensure that financial firms include sustainability in their procedures and in their investment advice to climate. So in Europe, we have developed this holistic taxonomy. We have developed this very demanding corporate sustainability directive. And at the same time, we have developed many financial instruments that are going to be crucial in financing the transition. The leadership example of Europe can be followed by other countries, but there is one difficult thing. Not all countries, most countries do not have the fiscal space for it. So if you don't have the fiscal space, then you cannot begin with the public investments that will produce the necessary reduction in economic uncertainty in order to attract the private investments and achieve these public-private partnerships in terms of financing the transition. In most countries around the world, in developing and low-income countries, you don't have the fiscal space. And not only you don't have the fiscal space, you don't have the skills and the capacity and the knowledge for such a transformation of the financial market. So what is crucial, not only for achieving the climate goals, but also for equity that Dinos addressed and climate justice, it is crucial. And this was one of the biggest and hottest discussions in our COP, in the latest COP, is that for geopolitical stability, you need to make sure that you create the multilateral investment banks and you give them enough funds to finance the transition in low-income country. And together with the financial resources, you also make available the means for technological transfer and capacity building to really engage in a co-designing procedure for the transition process, for the transition to sustainability. So it's very challenging, very demanding, but it must be done. So we must try.
Thank you very much. So now we will move on to Mr. Macheras. Mr. Macheras, I would like to ask you, how do you believe civil society could help support the decisions made in COP26?
Thank you, Daphne. And you can also call me Dinos, like dear Phoebe, which is the short for Konstantinos, my name for the friends from abroad. Civil society. Let's take it a bit from the beginning. One of the, in my opinion, most important decisions, and even a clever one, on behalf of the United Nations whole family, and Phoebe already represents an entity of the United Nations family, is that they realized from quite a couple of decades before that you need to have all stakeholders together. So there's a big effort of trying to get the involvement, to trying to invite civil society to be part of the discussion and not just leave it out on the street just with placards and then no action. So this was something that I really appreciate, that every time there's also a big effort to involve civil society. There was a problem, I think maybe Sandrine touched a bit on this year, because especially because COVID and other issues, it seems that less than ever civil society representatives and NGOs could participate in the proceedings. But nowadays, at least we have the long distance new applications we can use to be part of it. Having said that, what is civil society bringing in? First of all, don't forget that we still have an important role as civil society to play in terms of the watchdog factor. It's quite important to still be able to say in an independent, non-biased voice what you might think is not right. Regarding businesses, regarding governments, but in a way that it can also be constructive. If you have my personal opinion, there's no more no. It's like, listen, we don't agree with this. Let's talk about it on how we can change it. Because sometimes it's not just that they're trying to do something else, governments and businesses, is that perhaps they didn't have the chance to find out that there is another possibility or another opinion. And that's another, the second, I think, important role of civil society is to be the connector. One of the amazing examples, and I had the chance to witness this, is that you have all this scientific data, innovation, new methods, for example, the ones coming from UN SDSN network that was mentioned before. Somebody in the civil society needs to be close to SDSN that is trying to put this amazing resource of science and research and try to take it in another level, which means how we can offer it as best practices that everybody can engage and adopt in their everyday lives. The same with a series of amazing programs that we've seen from entities like the World Bank that Tobias mentioned, that sometimes there are other opportunities and there is money already available to be utilized by especially individuals and smaller groups, but there is to need to be a connection on how we bring both the policy and the citizens closer together. And I do believe that this is one of the most important aspects of civil society. At the end of the day, it's also about bringing the individual to the discussion, either to make sure that they keep having this on top of their agenda, because if they have it, then governments are going to have it, then business are going to have it, and it's also what we're going to be taught in universities, like the ones that Phoebe is teaching. But also what Sandrine said, let's go to the level of the city, okay? At the level of the city, if you manage to get in small teams, academia, policymakers, the local initiatives, and try to work with the residents, the citizens, on a micro level, to quote also what was said before, you can even have bigger wins that if you add them together, they can be more easy for us to get to the target. My last point, I want to beat on two things. That at the end of the day, it's not about what civil society has to offer. It's the fact that I think all of us here today recognize that it's all about what we can make together. And the fact that today we have scientists, we have academia, we have civil society, policymakers, financiers, we have to understand that we have to move forward, because I come from civil society that was mentioned, and I remember a day when civil society was against businesses. This cannot happen. Sustainable development has at least three legs if we don't count civilization and culture. It has the environment, society, and the economy. We just need to remind ourselves that there's another economy that perhaps we forgot. Okay? So bringing all of us together, I think, is the way to move the decisions, not just from COP26, but all of the other global decisions and opportunities that we have, and we must take advantage to make the goal happening before 2030.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your answer, Dinos. So let's go now to Mr. Lechtenfeld. What are those entrepreneurial characteristics that you recognize could lead the private sector in supporting the discussion made to become reality?
It's a good question. I don't think anyone has the answer to that. I would say there's a few things we can do, and I think there's a few things that can be done relatively quickly that haven't really been addressed or haven't really been discussed. When you talk to big industry and how they plan to reduce their emissions and what holds them back from reducing the emissions, I think everyone is agreeing, certainly in Europe, that this is the time to move. They know that if they don't move quickly, huge regulatory punishments will be coming at them soon. It may not be this year, it may not be next year, but it will hurt them badly if they don't move quickly. So I think senior management has understood that it's time to transition. What they're facing are, I would say, a number of challenges. The first one is that they are not able to see how they can write off existing assets. So if you have a large, let's say, factory, whether it's for cement or for fertilizers or steel, where you basically have huge emissions that are currently just being put out in the atmosphere, you might be willing to invest into new green technology, but you can't just shut down your existing reactor or production site, because it needs to be written off. And so this is, I would say, there's a lever here we have also from a governmental perspective. If we improve the incentives for writing off existing assets faster, so that basically a dirty factory doesn't have to operate on the current bad technology for another 20 years, but can be phased out over 5 to 10 years, be much, much faster. It's a tax reduction, of course, but it's a tax reduction that helps to invest in new technology. That means new machinery will be installed. That means new jobs, a push in the green industry. And so it is not just a tax credit with zero social benefit. No, it is a very smart way of spending some of our tax money. I would say that's something we are totally under exploring right now. So rather than giving lump sum subsidies, actually helping the depreciation so that the renewal can take place faster. I say that's one thing. A second thing I think that's totally missing in the debate is actually how we can better spend the funds to create the enabling infrastructure. So when I look at Central Europe, Western Europe, for example, we have a lot of debate on offshore wind energy coming in, and then it needs to be distributed in the country. This is a classic case where the governments can step up the game and say, we need to provide these energy corridors to the places where the green energy is needed, so the industrial centers of our countries, right? Whether it's in Greece and the large industrial cities, the port cities, or in Germany we can have a number of them. And this is, I think, where the debate has been moving really, really slow, and the action has been moving slow. We have some technologies where we know we will require them, we will need them, if maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but to achieve the 2030 goals and certainly to achieve the 2050 climate goals, we need them. Carbon storage. Maybe a most classic example. Nobody wants carbon storage under their household. I understand that. Nobody wants it in their backyard, but we have plenty of locations under the sea where we can bring it to. It's a very specific example, but it can account for up to 30% of our emissions, according to the IPCC simulations, depending, so this is a massive part of the solution. This is not just a small puzzle piece. What do we need? Well, we need pipelines. We need pipelines to bring all the CO2 from our cement factories and you name it, refineries there at a central station. This is not something the private sector can do. This is basically an enabling technology, classic public infrastructure, just like a highway or a power line or a railroad, let's say, where the state needs to move first. And I think, so these are, I would say, the industry is ready to decarbonize. If you think, for instance, of carbon capture, it's this technology that everyone now is talking about in the last couple of years as the breakthrough thing. Well, it has been around since the 1960s. Technically, we've been able to carbon capture all our emissions from any bigger chimney, any bigger factory since 1960. The technology is out there and is affordable. We're talking less than 50 euros the ton of carbon capture cost. But nobody knows what to do with it because governments never built the pipelines to get rid of this stuff. So, I talked to some, industries, can tell you the names here, but it's basically they're capturing at 35 euro the ton, and then they're releasing it at the end of the pipe because they don't know what to do with it. So technically, we're able to focus on it's certainly from the large sources of emissions, the really heavy assets. Where the bulk of emission comes from, we are able today to cut emissions very, very quickly. And I would say this is perhaps the most important thing. At the moment, a lot of the debate and also a lot of the models, the simulations, a lot of what the business consultancies, the research think tanks, what they focus on is kind of an equal drawdown of emissions across the board, across all sectors. I think that's not the smartest and cost-efficient way of doing it. We should, I believe, always start with the cheapest way to reduce emissions for the largest quantity of emissions. When we look at Germany, for example, the 110 dirtiest assets, so largest sources of emissions, account for over 30% of our national emissions. That is, 110 factories are a third of our footprint. They are extremely cheap to decarbonize because it's concentrated emissions in chimneys, basically. That is much cheaper than getting all Germans to stop eating meat or drive electric cars or do behavioral changes, which can also which will be part of the solution, but is much harder, much more expensive, much more painful, and we lose a large share of the population and kind of on the journey. Whereas if we tell people, let's get these factories clean, let's get these power plants clean, let's get these cement and steel factories clean, well, everybody will be for it. It's also good for the air quality. It's good for everyone. So you won't have for social fallout. So I think there's a lot we can do when we start applying some very basic economics principles to this problem, focus on the most cost-efficient carbon reductions now. Use some public money to invest in the required infrastructure to do it. I think that would be a critical part, and I think Greece is, from what I read at least, I think is doing a great job in also identifying carbon storage, for example, in the short to medium term as a possibility. I think the investments in hydrogen infrastructure and an expansion of offshore wind energy and solar, I think in the more Mediterranean countries is an excellent way forward and absolutely needed. So a lot of things are happening, but I think we can still get better to get more traction in the short term. And of course, what Professor Koundouri mentioned before, of course, the whole financing of innovation, I'm not going to repeat it. I agree to every word you said and couldn't agree more.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lechtenfeld. Let's go to Mrs. Dress now. So, Mrs. Dress, which are the policies that you would like to see applied within the next years of German cities and local public administration in order to reach its goals? And how much the participation of the Green Party in the government will contribute to the achievement of the goals?
Thank you very much. Yes, first, I'd like to answer your question, what is the role of cities? And of course, we expect a lot from EU taxonomy, we talked about this, and hope that this will facilitate climate neutral investments, on local level. And I can report about German cities. So there were very ambitious cities, some of them more ambitious than states. And somehow there was a little bit of competitiveness concerning climate goals. We really need to see if all cities are really fulfilling these goals. Some of them are more political goals than really underlined with life. So it should be more than just announcing climate goals. This is an issue. We really need to see how to achieve these goals. And so we are very much in favor that many cities make use of our SDG portal. So this enables our cities to produce sustainability reviews, and then from that they can also produce voluntary local reviews that can be transmitted to the United Nations. And I find it quite important to make the achievement of cities visible. And we transformed this SDG portal to Morocco and Italy. So the general idea is to really localize SDGs. So checking what goal is relevant for your state and what is a municipal indicator. So just I give you an example. You know about the first goal, poverty. The poverty in India is another other impact than in Germany. In Germany, we speak about our Hartz IV recipients, and in India, you say someone is not poor if he earns more than $1 a day. So, and I think this is an effort and could be interesting for many other cities all over the world. And yes, your second question, what we expect from the Green Party, of course, we can expect, as climate goals are at the core policy of the Greens, that this will push climate achievements, I think. And but from our discussion, I learned how important you also think it is to combine climate goals with the economy. And I agree with you very much. So if you look into analysis, for example, there's one important one from the United Nations. So we should also, let's say, relate social standards, or we can relate social standards with CO2 emissions. And from that you see that the countries with the highest social standards, such as Norway, Sweden, and also Germany, have of course higher CO2 emissions than other countries. I think in the moment Morocco is the only country worldwide that achieved the 1.5 degree goal. And this makes clear, I think, that we cannot achieve climate neutrality without economy. If we don't want a situation as we had during Corona times, so if we downsize economy, of course we can achieve easier CO2 and climate goals. But this we cannot afford. So we need to find a way to combine this. And for my experience could be not enough just reducing CO2 emissions. So we also should consider circular economy and, of course, the technical progress as far as renewable energies are concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now we move to the final round with a question common for all. Please note that we have no much time. So if it's possible to answer this question in 1 or 2 minutes, please. EU economy is run under many pressures. Apart from COVID-19, energy crisis, and the climate change, it suffers from migration flows, internal disagreements, integration problems, north-south gaps, low-cost Asian competition, geopolitical unrest in the East and the Eastern Mediterranean, and finally, a lag behind US and China in high-tech R&D. By taking the lead towards alternative green energy sources, which are more costly, and given the refusal of China, India, and Russia to bind themselves towards green efforts, this will add more problems to the European competitiveness. So how EU will cope with it and avoid a long-lasting stagflation? Let's start with Professor Kuduri.
Okay, I'll make it short because I know I talk too much. So basically, there is a danger there, obviously. The European leadership in this green and digital transition, it's a visionary example. But if China and the US and India do not follow, it can be almost detrimental to the competitiveness of the continent. However, I'm hopeful that this will not happen. And I will just say in a very summary format, it will take me 1 hour to explain. But basically, if you look at the numbers, the innovation leaders on the technologies that we need for the transition that Europe is envisioning, and it's showing the leadership example, are China and India. So they have a huge incentive to be part of this transition. And given the cost advantages that technological developments have given us already, and more are coming in the market, I believe that the profitable opportunities for businesses, for financial markets, are going to be in this green and digital transition. And the good, what is good about this is that these profitable opportunities will also have a positive footprint on the environment and the economy. So I'm hopeful that China and India will be on board, and of course US will be on board, because they have the critical mass of the technological innovations that are relevant for this transition, so the transition will be profitable for them. And I'm also hopeful that the marketplace will endorse this transition due to cost savings that will create profits, which simultaneously will be creating positive footprint on the environment and on society through job creation. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. Mr. Macheras, the floor is yours.
Last question, late in the day. Let's try to see how we can conclude this. I'm trying to follow on what Phoebe was saying, and the thing is that at the moment we have some facts. What the EU has managed the last few years, and especially since the new president of the Commission, Ms. van der Leyen, assumed power, is that we are a leader in the green transition. We were the first ones in the EU to have a Green Deal in just over a year during COVID as well. We have a lot of programs, a lot of policies following up this, and we see now that even, for example, now in Greece, every national government is trying to also comply. For example, in Greece, we are now discussing the environmental law, the climate law, which follows the one that was actually agreed by the European Parliament in the summer. What I'm trying to say is that at the same time, we are lagging behind in the digital transition, in my opinion. We are not the biggest economy anymore for a while now. I'm sorry about this. So we need partnerships. It's obvious that it's going to be hard to commence these partnerships with the ones that it seems that we can hide behind the fact that we don't share the same values, perhaps China. So two things I have to offer. First of all is that now that we have a new approach coming from the US, we definitely need as a European Union to make sure that we coordinate and have partnerships in place with the US, but also perhaps with others, Canada, Australia, even Japan, in even what was the basis of, if you remember, the TTIP. That I'm not talking about the political partnership, because this is very hard for especially national governments to absorb, but let's try and start with investment and trade agreements, because this can create a status quo for the rest of the world to follow. By having strategies like this, and especially if we start sharing among ourselves, like, for example, one of the things that the EU, I think we have progressed in is the innovation in renewables. We are one of the most innovative continents in agro-food, and we have made a lot of steps forward regarding regulations like how to use GMOs. These are things that are not readily available in place like the US. So there are definitely things we can combine and become better. The moment we do that, we have to bring everybody else back on the table as well. And by bringing back them on the table means that we also have to be very strict in some points, like what financial situations we have been present in the fact. Like, for example, we should make rules. We don't accept a product that comes from a country where they don't accept human rights. Maybe it's time for us to be strict about this. By doing this, perhaps we can be happy to see something like what happened in COP26, that at the very last moment, we saw the US and China in a surprise movement to have a partnership about pollution, about emissions in the next 10 years. So what I'm trying to say is that let's see with whom we agree to strengthen both our efforts, because the EU, I'm saying again, is a leader in the green transition. And by using these coalitions, then we can sit down in the table with India, Russia, China, and try to understand that even though we disagree sometimes what we call in values, there's no value that we disagree in climate justice, in climate emergency, and even more importantly, in climate ambition, because we need to have this way of moving forward together. Thank you to all.
Thank you. So, Mr. Lechtenfeld, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I think, well, the world is complex out there, and I don't think that necessarily, the green transition can help solve all problems on this planet. I mean, when you mentioned, what's happening in the Eastern Mediterranean, tensions between nations, of course, climate change can exacerbate some of these tensions and conflicts. And I've spent some years of my life working on in the region, but I don't believe this is how we wire it back. So we need diplomacy, we need non-military interventions, we need a very smart, foreign strategy to help our partners that are outside Europe to interact peacefully with each other, to interact peacefully with us. I think that is kind of totally independent or largely independent of our climate policies. Now, of course, when it comes to climate adaptation, I think just the story of Syria, I think a lot of people that worked on the country in the early 2010s, Syria was hit by a triple crisis when the whole conflict started. And one of it was the food crisis, and it was an oil crisis, it was an agricultural crisis. I mean, many things came together in a financial crisis. Yes, climate change adaptation can play a major role in keeping the world in a more peaceful state. So I think there is definitely a role to play. In the meantime, we need to transition to greener industries, and I think that's also something where the EU can play a major role in working with partners around the globe, certainly in poorer nations, but also in nations where European industry players have a major footprint, which is pretty much everywhere around the planet. So we have, technology that European countries that was developed in European countries deployed pretty much around the world. We have operators from large European corporates all over the world, and so it's not just us helping others; it's also us helping our own industries and operators, whether it's greening utilities or greening, factories, greening the cement production, just to use that as an example, or the fertilizer production or the steel production. I think it's more challenging when it comes to countries like China or India, because we have, certainly in China, much less of a direct footprint in a lot of the industries. And there, I think it's more about developing a smart diplomatic strategy, economic strategy. But I think a lot of very good initiatives are on there. And quite frankly, China has all the incentives itself. And I think we're seeing major shifts there, maybe not as ambitious as we would like to see them, or as more green politicians would like to see them. And I think it's important that we hold our ambitions high. But I don't think that any of the major countries are blocking entirely now, or shying away from the climate debate. That being said, I think we need to move by example. I remember some conversations with delegates from India that said, look, I mean, if Germany can show us that you can exit coal quickly, then we can show our government that it can be done. Right. And so, yes, people often say, well, a country like Germany, we only have 2% of global emissions. Well, historically, it's a lot more than that. So I wouldn't, just say it's only 2%. Historically, we are one of the largest emitters on this planet. A lot of our wealth that we have today comes from these historic emissions. So yes, we owe a little bit back to the world, and I think it's easy to forget that in today's heated political debate. But in the long run, this is not how our grandchildren will look back at us. So we have a global responsibility to play here in sharing not just financial resources, but also innovation and technology that is being developed now that can help undo some of the damage to this planet that has been committed over the past century or two. So I would say if we can move not just diplomatically and through financial support on the energy or industrial transformation and partnering countries, but also engage more in joint ventures, knowledge sharing, kind of helping to build the next generation of green technologies also in other nations. It's going to be better for everyone, because the more innovations we have around the planet, the better for the whole of humanity. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Sabine Dress, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, I totally agree with your findings, how important partnerships worldwide are, especially regarding India. So we expect a lot from global partnerships. They are also very active. We have some active ones on local level as well. And here we also are optimistic that the new government will support these global partnerships that are extremely important in terms of climate adaptation. And here we Germans learn a lot from the global south. So having said this, so we had some discussions with our Ministry of Foreign Affairs as far as China is concerned. So they informed us that China is not a partner in the way that we are sharing values. There was a strong competition between China and Europe and Germany. There was some takeovers, and they are really checking now each and every investment from China in Germany. And we were clearly informed about hybrid attacks as well. And yes, we were encouraged to look deeply into city partnerships, for example, and not to be too naive, because many business partners from China have clearly not just the economy, especially the Communist Party in their mind, and that is very dominant regarding their strategies. So here we don't have a clear way, not such a clear way as compared to India, for example. And these are my last words. So if we discuss different countries, so they are very diverse, and we need to find ways for partnerships. But what is true and fine for India could be totally different related to China. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Towards the end, what I keep from your previous statements is that there is an encouraging consciousness of our need to turn to green, leading to mature and documenting thinking about the necessary actions. So I would like to thank Professor Fifi Koudouri, Konstantinos Macheras, Tobias Lechtenfeld, and Sabine Dres for your overall contribution to tackling the contemporary crucial problem of the climate change, and with full success to your efforts. Also, the Konrad Adenauer Foundation and Director of Konrad Adenauer Greece and Cyprus Office, Mr. Henri Bonnet, of course, and all of you who watched us. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Good evening from
Thank you to Daphne as well. Amazing moderation. Thank you to all.
Thank you for.
Thank you to Cass.
Thank you all. Bye.